Hi, and welcome back to another episode of The Architecture of Health. I'm Deb Voisin, and this week my guest is an old friend, Scott Mason, who's an attorney, a coach, and most of all, a myth slayer. Welcome to our show today, Scott.
I am so excited to be here. Thank you for having me, Deb.
You know, not only is Scott a highly accomplished person who's had an amazing career, he's been to an Ivy League law school, he's got podcasts, he's given TEDx talks. Not only that, but I think his greatest accomplishment ever was being my first dance teacher. He's laughing. He's laughing. There I was, this terribly shy young girl in Kansas hiding in the basement that I wanted to learn how to dance. I wouldn't even take off my shirt in gym class because I was so body ashamed. I just didn't want anybody to I didn't want to be judged that anything I was doing was sexy, or I was just very weirdly innocent. And then one day Scott said, "Let's here, I'll show you a few steps in my basement." And then he gave me permission, guys. He gave me permission, and from that point on, dance became a central part of my life. So what Scott has done for me, I hope he can do for you today, which is give you a sense of courage to do what you are meant to do, to become what you want to be, whether it's in the realm of health or business. And one of Scott's greatest tools is similar to one of the ones I use, which is I like to get rid of myths. There are a lot of health myths, like just exercise more, just stretch, just eat vegetables. There are lots of things that get in our way of feeling fully empowered. And Scott has this amazing repertoire of mythical knowledge, classical knowledge. So he helps people use myths to get rid of myths. So, Scott, how did you? Now, I know you were really into mythology when we were young. We met when we were in junior high. How did you even get in this realm of going so deep into mythology? And then how did you realize that you could use it as a superpower, helping C-level executives, helping leaders, helping all sorts of people take charge of their lives?
As you mentioned earlier, you and I grew up in the same town in a rural area outside of Topeka, Kansas. And I would go on vacations with my family to what were then perceived to be super exotic and glamorous destinations, Denver, Colorado. And
That
I
was
mean,
our top play, too.
exactly. Hey, my mom worked for a dog food factory. I mean, our definition of glamour doesn't meet Hollywood thresholds. It never did. And so I will never forget, I had $15 of allowance that I took with me to Denver, and I was in a bookstore in downtown Denver, and I saw next to the cash register. I will never forget this moment as long as I live, Deb, when I was 9 years old. Propped up on a little table with children's books was something called the Larry's Book of Greek Myths. And it was a gigantic picture book with original lithographed artwork that struck me in my soul. But I didn't know that the artwork inside would affect me as deeply until I bought the book. The cover I remember seeing, it was Helios, the Greek god of the sun, traveling in his chariot across the sky with nymphs and satyrs dancing on the earth beneath him. And in that moment, without understanding it at the time, I was tapped on the shoulder to begin to experience my call. Just as, Deb, that first day that you and I danced together in the basement of my house, and there was a ping pong table in that basement too. I don't know if you remember that ping pong you do exactly, right? That we were dancing around. It was Donna Summer that I
Donna
forced you to dance
Summer.
to. Right. And you found your call. You knew it. I didn't know it then, but it was something that stayed with me and ultimately ended up being or my call. Deb, you mentioned that myths destroy myths. And it's so true. And I can't wait till we delve into that a little bit more deeply. But where did it come from? It came from the understanding after failing at a number of different attempts to really self create, I understood that the way to really stand out, be myself, feel connected, and electrified in this world to experience life at its boldest and most beautiful was to find whatever that thing was that I had connected to for the longest and with the most passion, and somehow drive that into my purpose on this planet. And with that was born the Myth Slayer, whose work is exactly what you described earlier.
Wow. Yeah, I think uh yeah, false beliefs getting in our way and wherever we inherited those from, whether it's a culture. And I love that you have specific, Scott can talk for hours about any one specific myth. I know the other day when we were had another conversation just casually, there were specific deities that had to do with medicine and health. And there are all these stories that you referenced. So now, but you just mentioned a big one, Helios. And that has become a one of the central characters in the way that you've moved forward with developing your business and working with your clients. So yeah, let's dig in a little bit there because that was your first myth. What did you learn or what have you learned? And then how have you applied that in a way that somehow improved your quality of life, health or otherwise?
Helios, as mentioned earlier, was the embodiment of the sun. He traveled across the sky every day in a chariot guided by these magnificent gold stallions, but they were also fierce and kind of scary. He traveled the zodiac pathway. That was basically his road system up to the top of the firmament and down. The firmament I have always viewed as the apex of vision. And Helios in myths, as a matter of fact, could, while he was out driving the sun, see everything that happened on the earth. And so when he was at the top of the firmament, he was at least to my eyes, the apex of his sight. He was the guardian of oaths because lies cannot stand the light. Lies live in darkness. He therefore existed to shed light, to be able to illuminate, but also to banish untruths. Deb, it's perhaps no coincidence that a commitment to truth has been a large part of both my practice as a coach and my professional trajectory. For instance, during my years as an attorney, I was second in command of New York City's Central Administrative Court. What was the name of that organization? The Office of Administrative Trials and Hearings, aka Oath.
Ah,
Myths.
ha.
Yeah. Right. There are no coincidences, I believe. And if anything, that sighting of Helios on that book cover and how it would play out in my life, just as the decision that we had to get together in my basement and me ask you haltingly to dance, was not a coincidence either. These things exist to reveal truths. And so myths and Helios have been a large part of my drive to make sure that no matter where I go, in whatever way is possible, and to the best of my abilities, I am always uncovering truths. And that, by the way, has included truths about myself, as well as truths and untruths that are out there in the world that people accept or just assume to be, because there's a lot of them.
Wow. Now this is very rich. And let's even use this small example of I was hiding in the basement that I love to dance. I would pretend when someone opened the basement door, I would, even though I was covered in sweat, I would act, oh, dance? Oh, not me. No, I'm hiding. I'm hiding my dance. Now, there are also, plants that are underground that eventually the seeds, when they have enough moisture, they need the sunlight. But at first, there might be a bit of furtiveness or guardedness or protectiveness to a new endeavor or something you feel shy about. But look at how you literally brought my dancing out to the light of day. We started sneaking into the gay dance club, and I would be free. I was absolutely overcome with freedom, and it was just a joyous thing. I to this day, one myth about dance, people think that you have to be really good and that you only deserve to dance if you're a fancy pants dancer. When in fact, dance has always been one of the basic things that humans do. We've through most of human history, we've fought and we've danced as sort of the edges of a spectrum, and most of it, people aren't doing the same steps. I mean, either it's such a simple step that every single person in the village knows it, or it's one person doing their own crazy freestyle. So I wanted to say that we've got the microcosm here of how you helped bring what I was doing out to the light of day. And a myth that I had in my mind was, oh, you have to be professional in order to deserve to be seen. You have to be good at dance to earn the right to be able to dance. So, and truth, I love that you're talking about truth. When we aren't honest with ourselves or each other, or the government isn't transparent, or uh, there's this sneaking and hiding of things, that's where mold and decay and the disease all kind of starts. So can you give me an example of how a truth that you unearthed either with a client or yourself, that in that process of either using a myth or uncovering truth in the kind of in the mode of Helios?
Before I do that, I just have to give a quick shout out to that dance club, because there may be someone who watches or listens to this who remembers the Lambda
The
Club in
lambda.
Topeka, Kansas. And by the way, one of the things that's interesting and perhaps goes as to the answer to your question the um is the fact that this bar, perhaps due to the fact that it was a gay bar, did allow those people who attended it space to be free. And what did that gay bar play? Although you and I are only in our early 30s, we still somehow managed to make it into that club during the height of like sort of the post-disco music era. What it played was basically disco music. And when I think about myths, or I think about things that can be uncovered, and we find truth within ourselves and are able to toss aside using the method, actually, I think a perfect example is you, based on the 9 muses, including the muse of dance, or perhaps the Maenads, who were basically sort of like the pips to the god Dionysus, if he were to have been Gladys. They were sort of his backup dancers. And they were known, let's talk about Dionysus in particular, they were known to imbibe his magical wine. And then when they were imbibing his magical wine, they would be full of his spirit, and they would find true liberation in dancing. Similarly, the muses, when they came and provided people with inspiration. And for those who don't know, the muses were 9 goddesses that were responsible for the oversight and inspiration related to the arts and science and anything that required some sort of inner spark to bring out into the world as an artistic expression, or a creative expression, or a push forward of knowledge. And so there was a muse of dance, and there was a muse of comedy, and all this sort of stuff. And one of the things that is interesting about the Maenads as well as the muses, when it comes to letting that inspiration touch you, is that you again have freedom through that inspiration. These gay clubs during a time of extreme repression in the United States. Let's not forget, you and I were going to these gay bars in the middle of the 80s, when the AIDS epidemic was at its height, when people were talking about rounding up gay men on television, evangelicals, and putting tattoos on their arms and sending them away to concentration camps. This was a reality at the time. And so we were hiding, you finding your expression, me being able to express through dancing too. We're finding through and in light of that oppression, that space of inspiration and freedom. There is something mythical and epic about that, because it is us being tapped by those mythical spirits, by that force within that the gods and goddesses all represent. I will add one final thing with regards to that too, which is that disco music itself emerged as a reaction to oppression and a lack of freedom. It emerged in Black and Latino, mostly LGBTQ clubs in the late 60s and early 70s, in these underground sort of house parties, and then later dance clubs burst into the mainstream consciousness then. And of course, when it became too dominant, there was a backlash against it. But what did disco and dance music always represent? Freedom. It represented the destruction of the myth that, like you said, we couldn't be who and what we wanted to be, and allowed us to be whatever it is, however ridiculous or drunken or silly or outrageous we might want to be.
I love how you went into that. And it just, why did I never think of the connection between muse and music?
Yeah.
And that's the feeling I remember having, is because I wasn't worried about the people I was around judging me. We were all being
Yeah.
free together. And I wasn't worried about being misinterpreted as me coming on to someone or wanting to have sex with someone. I like the freedom of the androgyny for me of the experience
Yeah.
was really strong. But the biggest thing of all was, for that reason, the music could pass through me. And it wasn't
Mm.
my ego trying to do something. I think I also see that as people getting in their own way when they think that everything's a performance and this is for someone to see it, and it's an external experience rather than you being that hollow reed, like they talk about in Zen, of the forces that are flowing through you. And music and sound, they move in us and through us and out. So what's your next? Okay. So, myths that get in our way of expressing that freedom.
Yeah.
Any others start hitting you about that, kind of that letting go process, that allowing process, instead of the being and the doing and the striving and struggling?
After a lifetime of studying Greek myths in particular, and by the way, loving those stories with a passion that I am sure rivals your love of dance, I began to understand that although there are generally recognized broad categories of myths, there is no official canon of mythological genres. That being said, myths, as you mentioned at the top of this discussion, represent the hopes, the dreams, the imaginations, the aspirations, and the cautionary tales of entire cultures. What are cultures but groups of people? And so, what myths also are projections of individual hopes, dreams, aspirations, beliefs, and cautionary tales combining together to form those of the culture. Why do I say all of that? Because the genres of myths that you find within a given culture, such as that of ancient Greece, are really simply extensions of the types of stories that we tell ourselves. I mentioned both times a minute ago cautionary tales, because many myths, like I said, are expressions of the desires as to what the ideal person should be like or what a hero is or whatever, but some point as to what we should not be, or they correspond, in particular, certain genres of myths that I've identified correspond to psychological states that keep us stuck, that as myths keep us stuck within our own myths, or that are corollary to myths that we tell ourselves. These are the 5 toxic myths. And I'm going to briefly run through them because the freedom theme goes as to at least one of them. First of all, there is the tragic origin myth. The tragic origin myth is when in myth, it is basically the creation of, or it's a version of someone's early life, the hero's early life, or what caused them, or whatever problems the myth is addressing to exist. So the tragic origin myth is one in which the mental blocks that we have are all blamed on the circumstances of our early life or birth. So, for instance, I can't dance because I'm awkward or because I'm left footed and only people that are right footed can dance. That's myth number one that's toxic. Toxic myth number two is the social myth. And this goes as to freedom. You're living out a social myth when the stories that you're telling yourselves are governed by the expectations of society. And it's a corollary to mythic types that exist to explain various social mores and customs, or more specifically, to justify social mores and customs. So, an example of a social myth that you're living would be, okay, only professionals can go out in public and dance, and therefore I can't because I believe that the social expectations are contrary. By going ahead and dancing, no matter what people thought, irrespective of social expectations, you actually shattered your own social myth. You broke the myth that was driving myths that you were living out. The third is the ritual myth. The ritual myth in myth is when you are basically engaging in a, or you're telling a story that justifies rituals that don't serve any purpose. For instance, myths explaining animal sacrifice. Ritual myths in our regular lives are when we are engaging in behaviors over and over that we've told ourselves are necessary, even though they don't serve us anymore. The fourth and the fifth are closely related. The fourth is the underworld myth, which occurs when you believe that your future is going to lead to cataclysm. And obviously, those are based on myths in which the hero or the heroine somehow ends up in the underworld. And the final one is the doomsday myth, which is basically lived out when you think that the apocalypse is around the corner. And those are things like the book of Revelation or end of the world myths that exist throughout. And by the way, you may have been living out the apocalyptic myth when we were dancing, right? Because you might have felt that if you went out to these clubs and fully expressed yourself, you were going to face some sort of personal or other cataclysm that would negatively impact your future.
Holy cow, what a powerful summary of five tragic myths, or what toxic. Oh,
Ah,
Scott. Wow. Okay. I just, we could talk all day, literally, days and
good.
days, weeks and weeks. I love, though, the practical, the simple, and the aesthetic that you've consolidated down to these five that are
Mhm.
so actionable. So the tragic origin myth,
Yeah.
yes, in medicine or health, it's like, quote, genetic.
Yeah.
Oh, my family, we all have bunions. No, your family all has the same behaviors. You're all
Right.
moving the same way. You're thinking the same way. That is not an inevitable forecast, nor is it an excuse. If you don't want to have bunions, guys, you can get rid of them. Is it easy? No, but it's simple. Second, the social myth. Exactly. We have embedded in this very large, the larger a society gets, the more hierarchical it needs to become in order for there to be order. Way back hunter gatherer days, you would have tribes smaller than 30 and people could be a collective, and justice was clear. There's a hoarder, you punish them. There's a freeloader, you punish them. But we have to have these larger structures, these social structures, to create some type of order. But the side effect is, we didn't choose that those value systems. We didn't choose them at the time when and most of all, we can't even see them. We can't
Yeah.
see that we've separated ourselves from professional athletes. We can't see that we've separated ourselves from our own self-care possibility. We and yet we could. We could, because, like you said, there are these social myths that prevent us from taking other actions that are in our purpose or self interest or choice. And ritual. Okay, ritual. I want to go
Mm.
back to that one because, my dancing story didn't necessarily have that in it. Yet, when I talk to people about making a choice to free up their movement in ways that build health, or even Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. So this reminds me of that where they talk about the monkeys, and there would be a monkey that if it reached towards the banana, it would get a
Yeah.
shock. And they trained out a whole generation of monkeys. They're like, don't you dare reach for that banana. And then every generation after that, each monkey would beat up any new monkey, like, no, 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 don't touch the banana. We those kinds of
Wow.
punishments are easily passed along as ritual without examining the reason behind the original ritual and without testing the hypothesis. I find that especially when someone, you know, has some sort of health condition, they go along with the rituals of everyone else around. But when you peel back the evidence and you start to look at the numbers, you look at how many people have it or what kind of treatments are being used and whether those are effective. You look at another culture, you look at another time period in human history, and those are powerful tools to freeing yourself of inherited rituals that are useless. I know that when I was a yoga teacher teaching for a while 15 times a week, I I was performing a ritual that I didn't know was passed along with embedded things that weren't all that healthy in the name of health, because who knows how many monkeys back there was someone who had a different context, a different motive. For example, the word asana means sit. The monks who were going to sit all day used some of these positions. They didn't have the goals that I have, which is to run and jump and climb and fall beautifully. So, what do you see in your coaching practice? Because you help leaders of all type. Can you talk a little bit more about either in your own life or your client's life how this toxic myth of ritual, ways that you've been able to spot that was going on?
Before we go any further, I want to thank you in particular for turning your attention to this particular myth, because it is one when I go on podcasts or talk to people about, they very rarely um focus on. They usually go to things like the underworld myth or the tragic origin myth more so than the ritual myth. And the ritual myth is unbelievably powerful. I'll give you an example from personal life that directly, I believe, relates to the theme of this show. And then I'll give you an example from professional life. So I have been honest about this publicly in a number of different settings that I've been in. If this is something that makes people uncomfortable, I will be discussing treatment of children in a moment, that in a way that if you are triggered by harsh treatment of children, you should know about. I was someone who experienced a very, very violent childhood and often received violence without really understanding exactly what I had done. Some cases, I don't think I really had done anything. Was right, like I just was on the receiving end of violence. And, you know, as I grew older, I began to verbally express my very strong feeling states about the extreme punishment that I would receive. And one of the things that my parents would say is, well, you are around a lot of white people. That's how white people don't raise their children the way we as black people do. It may not be apparent to anyone who looks at me if they're watching this on YouTube. I am biracial, but I was adopted by two African Americans. And so their belief was that the way that black people would raise their kids would be one that was a lot more harsh in punishment, a lot more violent, and that's just the way it was. I never really thought that that was right, but as I grew older, I began to understand where they probably got that idea from. Both of my parents were descendants of slaves. And what happened during slavery, as you know, if you were a slave and you disobeyed the overseer or the master in the tiniest way, it might be winking at someone or not, you know, doing enough yard work that day, you could receive punishments ranging from severe whippings to being hung. And so this is the way, in order to understand discipline and behavioral control, my belief is that this mode of expressing discipline was brought into the family that ultimately led to my parents. And this sort of hyper extreme punishment was a form of the ritual myth. This is the way Black people discipline their children, was the myth. It may have served a purpose, or at least it was caused by something at some point in the past. But that period in the past has long since gone. So at some point, someone needed to say, you're living out the ritual myth. It's time to change that myth and be different. I had to be the one who self consciously said, when I go through life treating others that I am angry at or who I have power over, I will not continue to express myself in a way that is an expression of that myth. I am ending that ritual and looking to move in a different direction. So that's a personal one that has been a major part of my life journey, one that I'm glad to actually, believe it or not, have had so that I could learn from and help other people out with. Professionally, you see it with regards to people who find themselves in a career situation that they go back to day in, day out, month after month, year after year, even though that career is no longer serving them or making them miserable. I am an attorney, although I am no longer practicing. But when I was practicing law, you would see it everywhere. People, especially in litigation or who, worked for these huge law firms where they had no personal life, they were miserable. They were drinking all the time. They were doing illicit drugs. They were angry. They had alienated families. They had no lives. They had problems with obesity and other conditions. And what was that all about? It was the ritualization of their identity. I am a lawyer. I go to my job every day and do XYZ. That ritual over and over and over again became a myth that was toxic and threatens to destroy them. I will just stick in one more because it may speak to you. The idea, because it comes to mind when I think about lawyers and similar professionals, I don't have time to take care of my health. I don't have time to go for a walk. I don't have time to jump rope. Instead, my ritual is I wake up, I drink coffee, I grab a bagel with margarine on it. I then hop into my car and drive to work. And I don't eat a wholesome meal until I get home because I'm too busy. That's living out the ritual myth. You do it over and over again, even though it doesn't serve you. And even though, really, if you were to step back from it, you would have the power to be able to change it. And that's something that comes up with not all of my clients, but a significant percentage of them. Thinking about, if you want to achieve all these things that you say you want to achieve, well, you've got to be in good enough health to be able to do it. And if you do achieve it, you've got to be in good enough health to be able to sustain it, not keel over.
Mm-hmm. Wow, the ritual, how toxic a ritual could be, but and the power of it on the other side
Yeah.
is shifting ritual. I think I've already talked a lot about this in the past. My 111-day long rituals to shift a behavior, they're very small, but I just keep at it every single day so that over time the gravity of the existing ritual gets a little eaten away, kind of like every wave that comes to the shore eats away a little bit at the shape of the stone. Just and so ritual powerful both ways. And another example in the animal kingdom or the insect kingdom is the jar full of fleas, that when it grows up, that first generation grows up with the lid on the jar, and they learn not to jump above a certain height. When you take that lid off, they don't leave because
Wow.
They've stopped examining the truth of the edge of what's a healthy. Now, I'm guessing there's probably even something else underneath that, meaning that the locus, the social locus of the fleas, maybe, maybe it's fine. Maybe there's no reason to jump out of the jar. But I do know, like the examples you talked about, there are lots of reasons to jump out of the jar. How good you could feel, how much better your brain will work when you have enough blood and water and nourishment. Yeah, the it's scary to question a ritual. So okay. So then the question is, we as humans are operating so much on ritual because we only have so much capacity, so much willpower for change. That's one reason I pick micro habits to change, is because I don't
Yeah.
want to go waste a bunch of willpower on something and then struggle and then have it fall away. So the question is, then how do we pick a smart ritual to shift? How do we know that's and for me in these movement practices where I would have compulsive exercise rituals to like deal with the fact that I was sitting at a computer and driving all the time, and it would take things breaking down to realize, oh, something is wrong in this ritual. And then I started to learn to measure what is it that I want to do 50 years from today when we're both 100 and no, we're only 30, right? Just kidding. No, I'm proud of my age. We're aging beautifully. And
Exactly.
once I picked, though, the longer term perspective, and that's why I'm attracted to how you're dive into this classical body of wisdom, because it transcends one culture. It transcends,
Yeah.
although it's cultural in the origin, right? But there are classical patterns that can help us look beyond today and tomorrow, beyond the next 10 years, beyond the next 100 years. And I think it's easy to get confused and distracted away from the fact that there are certain kind of sacred geometries or healthy practices or viewpoints that are even more lasting and nourishing. How do you decide? Like, I know that one of your other specialties is purpose, discovering purpose. Like, can you give an example where uh uh you know where it was worth the inertia to get past a ritual and build a
Yeah.
new one?
Yeah. A lot of threads are going to come together in that very deep question. So let me go back and start the answer by pointing out something that you hinted at a few moments ago about ritual that is uncomfortable for people to talk about, but is a reality. In ancient times, the most important rituals were those involving sacrifice of animals, usually to the gods. In other words, the most important and valuable rituals with the most important outcomes were associated with sacrifice. When you are looking at your rituals, what is it that you're sacrificing? And if you want something better for yourself, what is it that you're willing to sacrifice instead? Purpose. When I work with my clients, after we after we explore the 5 toxic myths that I just discussed and engage in a formal ritual to banish them from our lives, I have them do an exercise called visiting the oracle. And really, for those who don't know, the oracle was a prophetess in ancient Greece that was allegedly a diviner of the god Apollo. And if you asked her a question, one question you were allowed to ask, she would give you an answer, and it was always correct. Now, you may not understand what she was saying, but she was always right. And the purpose of exploring the inner oracle that is within all of us, particularly those who feel a call to live their fullest life, is to do exactly what you're talking about, figure out what their reason is for being and what outside of themselves uh, combines their skills and experiences passions and the things that they just are not willing to do with something greater to be what I call purpose. When they know their purpose, they have heard the words of the oracle and are ready to act. But before you can act and begin to take the planning steps to fulfill your purpose, what are you willing to sacrifice? That drives what rituals you want to change. And how much do you really want to live out your purpose? Really, once they know their purpose, the clients will know what rituals are getting in the way. And so, how much of that getting in the way are you able to tolerate if it means you are not able to live out your purpose or your purpose will be significantly delayed? Once you know the rituals that you're engaging in that are getting in the way of fulfillment of your purpose, frankly, it's rarely difficult to figure out the action step. It might be a matter of me reminding them exactly as you just said that they need to do it incrementally and not all at once. But let's say you want to start a nonprofit that serves inner city youths that might be otherwise at risk, and you want to teach them things like character and discipline and responsibility and openness to love and meaningful relationships. Okay, for you to do that, then is your being away from your family 7 days a week a ritual that will support that or not? Well, if it is something that's not supporting your purpose, then the idea is for us to work together to figure out exactly what tactical or logistical steps are in place so that can happen. But logistics and tactics are always, to my eyes, pretty easy and obvious once you're willing to be honest about what the larger goal is that the ritual is currently serving and how that ritual is blocking you compared to what you want to do. Anytime you know your purpose, you're going to have to sacrifice something to get there. But it's important to also understand that the rituals that you are engaging in are also costing you something, right? So if you have a habit, I used to go all the way to Brooklyn to do jujitsu every day. I live in Manhattan in New York City. That was like a 45-minute to hour commute each way every day, 2 hours to do an hour of jujitsu. Was that sacrifice of my time worth it? Yeah, your face is saying it all. Once I knew that that was impeding my ability to spend time more productively on my purpose, figuring out I needed to do something else besides jujitsu at that particular dojo became pretty easy. Right? It's something that didn't take a lot of thought to be able to acknowledge and then implement.
Wow. So much here. One is purpose. That can be a scary, or how could I say? People can be reactive in thinking they don't have one or they haven't found it or how do I find it? There can be that kind of greedy grasping. One thing that occurs to me is there is a gentle and peaceful way to find purpose as well, instead of thinking it's something we have to constantly invent and it needs to be special and it needs to be better than everybody else's. For example, one of my themes in this show is architecture. I remember in the 2 years I studied architecture, I remember most of all this one, other than learning about patterns, I remember this one example of the teacher just showing a pathway that had been walked in the dirt next to the cement sidewalk. And they were like, that's where the architect probably should have put the sidewalk because that's where people end up actually going. And so I just wanted to tie that idea back into purpose, which is when we look at what we already do and what we've already done, even since we were kids, if there's something that just keeps coming out of us that where we keep end up making choices, there's already the suggestion of purpose, but can we fortify it then? Can we build from that? Can we enhance it and start from there, where it's kind of also then organically tied to our history? For example, when I was young, because they maybe I'll even I'll turn this back to you. Definitely, I do remember that you were always writing and drawing back in junior high, the hairy heads, the stories, the mess. You're always very storytelling. with pictures and that you were writing these little novelettes, and there was really no reason. You weren't getting paid for it. Nobody,
Right, I
and
sure wasn't.
I was if I had, I remember times when I was 5, even before I could read and write. Maybe I was 4, and I would sit down and just scribble all over a piece of paper as though it was handwriting, and then position myself in my little desk, my old school desk in front of a window as though the window was framing me for a TV shot. That
Oh,
I
how
was a
cute.
journalist. I was a journalist before I could read and write and know what I was actually doing. And later that would show up in funny ways. So, and it's great at this point in our lives, in the probably the last half of our life here, that you and I are both picking up those threads. Like used the word thread. Our purpose is a weave of many. It
Yeah.
can be a weave of many threads, and it doesn't have to look like anyone else's. And it's already here inside of us. And that the other thing that you talked about with sacrifice, sacrifice. Yeah, I heard recently this nice quote that had something, they were defining passion. It doesn't mean it's just something that you love. It means it's what are you willing to sacrifice other things for? Like what are you willing to put up with the uncertainty and the uncomfortableness and whatever other opportunities are lost for picking that thing. And when you have this kind of magnetic pull towards something, you're more likely to be able to stick with it through going from being bad at something to then gaining some mastery and craft. I love it.
I am blown away by all of that. It reminds me of two things. First of all, when people hear about connecting to your purpose, that purpose doesn't have to be something grandiose. It's not necessarily saving the world or being, a pillar of the community or anything like that, or inventing a new app or transforming technology. Your purpose really, if that's truly who and what you are, can be to be a good parent or to be able to, because this is your skill and something that you really enjoy, be a caretaker of someone in your life who needs it, or of your children who themselves may grow up and become this sort of world changing thing. So when we talk about purpose, for many people, if they feel a tap on the shoulder and a call to step into a larger purpose, it likely is going to be something that is more sizable in its scope, but there's no judgment attached to a small in scope or large in scope purpose, because ultimately both of them can have global impact and can have impacts that resonate in ever widening circles through history. And we don't know how those are going to play out, right? Who probably had more impact in the world? A Hollywood celebrity like Taylor Swift, or the grandmother of Martin Luther King Jr.? I think it's debatable at the very least, even though Martin Luther King Jr.'s grandmother, she's someone in obscurity. No one even knows who she is. And so that's just something to think about. And then also when it comes to um, really stepping into the threads that we have, to not ever deny or run from the fact that our lives have infinite complexity because of the infinite number of relationships and circumstances that we pivot into and out of every single day. There is a strand of new age thinking that says that every single moment, anytime anyone on the planet makes a decision, and that might even be to turn your head this direction or that direction, a different universe is created with different possibilities. And I don't know enough I'm not a scientist, so I don't know whether that's true or not. And I'm certainly not a spiritual master, although I've come a long way in that respect, to know whether that is the definitively correct way of viewing the world and our experience from a metaphysical perspective. But I will also say that it does point to the complexity within which we live. Rather than run from that, I recommend that people embrace it, because those complexities all point to the breadth of possibilities that we have in us if we can block the myths that are keeping us from being able to see them all.
Wow. And that's one to tie it back to the body one more time is our exactly how we are, every cell, every ache, every angle, every neuron, every bit of us is a perfect response to everything, every single thing that's ever happened to us. We're carrying every response to our ancestors' DNA. It's very rich and exciting because that also means there's so much coming and we're reflecting everything that's happened, but then we can also choose what to adapt towards in our future.
Yeah.
Wow. I think
Yeah.
that, our time, we could, like I said, talk all day, but I don't think we will because you're just too valuable of a human. Need to get you back in your purpose, helping people around the world live exciting lives full of courage and purpose. So, and maybe some other time, Cataclysm and Doomsday, we could do a whole episode on that.
Yes.
That's delightful. I can't wait. But I want the audience to know, and have you already given us lots of starting points, question your rituals, question your origin story. Like, what are these limitations? What are these beliefs? Uh, question, be aware that you're operating under a variety of social myths and other things that are driving your existing behavior, and knowing that you have the possibility to author a shift. You can initiate a shift and it sounds like as long as you know also clearly what the sacrifices, get some idea of sacrifice. Any last words to our audience about, besides how they could find out more about you, but before that, just any one last sentence or synopsis about what you want people who are listening to take away from what you've learned about using, these 5 toxic myths.
As I mentioned earlier, the myths were individual hopes, goals, dreams, aspirations, and cautionary tales projected into and integrated into the larger fabric of the culture within which the individuals operated. The characters in the myths themselves were similarly these expressions. The gods and the goddesses, as well as the heroes, were reflections, dreams of the highest possibilities that every individual could aspire to. Think about yourself as merely the modern day embodiment of one of these deities. When you do that, you're going to connect to your highest self. But not only that, as every God had a function, as every God had a purpose, you will more deeply understand your own. If you take some time to read some books on myths after this episode is over and you really absorb the characters in them with that in mind, you might start to see your life change.
I love it. I know one immediate step our audience can take is on Instagram. You do a live stream 7 a.m. Pacific on Monday mornings. And you are on different radio shows you've been on so many different podcasts. You've got a YouTube channel. Guys, I really recommend listening to more of Scott's genius. He's also coming out with a book pretty soon. And his website is your website the best place to start to find all of these
Absolutely.
resources?
Yes.
myfreedomrocks.com.
You got it.
But the website has got you can start at the website and then YouTube and Instagram. Find out more about this guy, Scott Mason, the Myth Slayer.
One of the upcoming interviews will be with a certain Deb Boyson. And so I can't wait to spread that one out into the world so that your audience can hear what you have to say about all of this.
And you have 2 TEDx talks. You have 2 TED Talks out there too in the universe. Okay. All right, guys. Well, Scott, this has been an absolute pleasure. I can't believe we even started by talking about dancing in your basement, but I'm so glad we did.
The best topic ever.
Okay. Signing off.